Hi and welcome to Kitchen Sink Dharma. This episode is the last of a set of 4 in which I talk about the elements. A few weeks ago I mentioned that the Satipatthana Sutta, the teaching on the 4 foundations of mindfulness, includes instructions to meditate on the 4 elements in the body: earth, water, air and fire. Each one representing characteristics of the body. Earth means solidity or hardness or softness. Water is about fluidity and cohesion. Fire is about heat or cold. And air is motion. We're taught to be mindfully aware of those characteristics as a way of looking at our experience and deconstructing the body into those elementary qualities. So in doing so, we start to see it for what it is, part of a greater whole. And we also start to see that there's no fundamental difference, no fundamental separation between the elements in the body and those outside the body. And today's about the air element, about mindfulness of the air element, and that means noticing movement in the body. And it includes the sense of movement that we experience when we're breathing, but also movement of energy, of feelings, and everything happening at the microscopic level, and the whole inner currents of respiration. Because of course the word respiration is not just about breathing, it describes the chemical reactions that happen in every single living cell and the process of releasing energy. So when we breathe, we really are breathing into every cell in our body. And as we breathe, we're taking in and giving out air all the time, and oxygen's being absorbed into the bloodstream. From there it's transported into every cell. Carbon dioxide's being exhaled and so on. And it links us to the world around us. It's a real reminder that we're not capable of independent existence. And there's no boundary between the air in our bodies and the air around us. It's just air. There's just air. And there's the air that we borrow for a brief moment, and the air that touches our skin. And it's not really ours to keep, but it's also a part of us. And of course, most of the time breathing happens whether we notice it or not. And normally typically a person at rest will take about 16 or 17 breaths a minute. And of course the rate is higher if we're in a state of arousal, or lower when we're very relaxed or when we're asleep. And of course our state of health can affect our breathing. It can alter our breathing rate. And some of us can take breathing very much for granted. That's not true of everyone. And as a child I suffered from asthma. And it showed me in a very direct way that breathing isn't always effortless. I can remember sometimes when moving air into my lungs was really quite hard work. And it's interesting, as a function of the body, breathing can either be conscious or it can be unconscious. It can be intentional or it can be completely automatic. And that's one of the reasons why in early Buddhist teaching we're taught to use breath as a tool to explore our experience. And it acts as a bridge in a way between the known and the unknown, the conscious and the unconscious mind. And as we observe the quality of the breath, we're also able to observe the state of the mind, and there's an awful lot to explore. So if you were to turn your attention to the body right now, and the sensations of breathing, you might notice movement in your chest and your abdomen. You might notice much more than that. Because the breath's connected to our stress response, for example. Breathing becomes shallow when we're frightened or when we're anxious. Tends to become deeper and softer as the mind starts to settle. And it can be really easy and pleasurable and relaxing, or it can be harsh, it can be quite unpleasant sometimes. When a sense of inner calm starts to arise, that has a physical dimension in the breath. So if you sense into the breath right now, you might notice whether it's comfortable or harsh or deep or shallow, fast or slow. And that will tell you something about the state of your heart and your mind right now. Many people will incorporate a degree of mindfulness of breathing into their meditation practice. And I remember when I first started meditating, I thought meditation on the breath was a beginner's practice, some kind of foundational practice that we do before we get onto the real stuff. And that's completely wrong. It's a complete misunderstanding. I've heard it described as an entry-level meditation. It's not true. It's based on a lack of awareness of the potential of breath to liberate us. It can be a complete practice. And according to the teachings of the Buddha, it can take us all the way to the deepest realizations, to the deepest awakening. There's a very famous teaching on mindfulness of breathing called the Anapanasati Sutta, and it offers a complete map for the whole path of awakening. And it teaches that we can cultivate tranquility but also insight through the breath. There's nothing more complicated required than the breath. And the sutta consists of 16 contemplations as 4 sets of 4, and it offers a whole progression through the 4 foundations of mindfulness just based on awareness of the in-breath and the out-breath. And it starts off with just calming and settling the mind, and then we move into contemplating our experiences in increasingly refined ways to gain insight. And we start to see the 3 characteristics and experience them in the breath and body. And when I say the 3 characteristics, what I'm talking about is that we see, firstly, that everything's impermanent, everything's changing, it's always in a constant state of flux. Secondly, that our experience can't give us any lasting satisfaction, partly because everything is constantly arising and passing away. And one of our major causes of unhappiness is a tendency to look for security, to look for stability in things that are not stable. And thirdly, the understanding that no one and nothing can be said to have a permanent fixed self. Everything's made up of a number of just contingent, constantly changing elements and processes. And while all this might sound like an exercise in philosophizing, it's actually really important. Once we really truly see these 3 characteristics, we completely change the way that we live our lives. And we can stop resisting the whole change and flow of life and just go with it, and stop fighting to protect something that doesn't need protecting. We can start living. But just going back to the calming the mind thing, because before all of that, the first thing that we notice with mindfulness of breathing is the tendency of the mind to wander. And the fact that the mind can be quite reluctant to rest on something as simple as the breath. It's just the nature of the mind just to wander off in all directions. So the initial practice involves going back to the breath over and over again, many, many times, and training ourselves just to hold the attention on the breath a little bit longer. And when we meditate, it's often helpful to start with a few conscious, intentional breaths. And we can soothe ourselves by resting attention on the breath and maybe even consciously breathing more slowly. One technique is to make the out-breath a little bit longer than the in-breath. And then we can start to just rest our awareness on normal, natural breathing. Let it just flow by itself. Let it just breathe itself. And then if we can bring our awareness to the more subtle aspects of the breath, we can bring some precision into our mindfulness of breathing. We can actually track the breath. We can track its length and the depth of each breath, and its shape, and where it begins and ends. And start to notice how it affects the different systems in the body. There's actually potentially a lifetime of investigation if we decide to explore this practice. Because the whole concept of breath actually describes a number of elements, a number of sensations, all of which are impermanent, all of which just last a few moments, and we can track them. We can track those parts of the breath, every single one of them, and notice when each sensation arrives and when it goes away again. And we can pay close attention to the end of the in-breath and the beginning of the out-breath and the brief space between each breath. The movement that takes place in the belly and the diaphragm and the chest. The sensations at the nose or at the mouth. We find that no 2 breaths are the same. And if all of this sounds daunting, it doesn't need to be. It's just about taking a curious, receptive attitude to the sense of movement and the change in the body as we breathe. And what we start to perceive is that this isn't me, it's not mine, it's impermanent. There's nothing here to get attached to. Because ultimately the body is just simply a temporary coming together of the elements. And we live by letting the breath in and letting it out again. We've got no choice but to do this. We haven't got the choice to hold on to the breath. We have to let it in and let it out. We have to exchange air with the outside environment. Hanging on to it is not an option. And the air element, just like the other elements, it's not me, it's not mine, it just is. It just comes and goes. And this doesn't really require any big intellectual effort, it's just noticing. It's just noticing this is what's happening. Maybe noticing this is how it feels. because of course your body knows how to breathe. You don't need to listen to a talk or read a book to know how to breathe, and all of those insights will arise naturally if we just pay some attention to the breath. No need to push or strain, because we're breathing now, we were breathing last week, we'll be breathing again tomorrow morning, and everything will fall into place if you keep practicing. If you keep going without getting too lost in the stories, the narratives and so on. So mindfulness of breathing isn't the only practice that leads to awakening. It's not even the only practice taught within Buddhism that leads to awakening, but it can be, if you want it to be, the whole of your practice. Or it can be part of your practice. It may be entirely absent from your practice, but for me it's an important part of my practice, and this is why. Because it's powerful. It works. Mindfulness of breathing calms us, and it also offers us insight. And it's taught as a very direct, very simple approach to waking up. One of the great things about it is it doesn't carry any cultural baggage, and it's always available, whatever you're doing. Of course, when you're meditating on the cushion or whatever, but it's also available at the traffic lights, or when we're stuck behind a computer screen, or when we're queuing up somewhere. It's always there. And it really helps us to develop our capacity for mindfulness. It can help us to see things as they really are. It can help us to cut through layers of delusion and conditioning. And it can offer a meeting place. It's a place where the body and mind unite. And it can anchor us. So when we're practicing other forms of meditation, say if we're cultivating kindness or compassion or forgiveness, or if we're in a body scan, if we're doing walking meditation, just bring in continuity of mindfulness to our lives, and breathing and resting the attention on the breath anchors us, it holds us there. And we can practice it, as I said, anywhere, anytime. Other people don't even have to know that we're meditating. And that to me makes it truly limitless in its application. So that's what I wanted to say about air and breathing this week. Thank you for listening to Kitchen Sink Dharma. See you again soon.